A very good evening to all my dear students. I hope you are all are enjoying these sessions and you all are doing the homework that has been given to you. That is, you all are going through the modules with illustrations, with examples. See, this much I can expect from all of you. So good evening, Riya, Narayan, Pratiksha, Astha, Jiyut, Pooja, Charu, Harsh, Sandeep. A very good evening to all of you, right? So this is our third session for the chapter number 3, which is audit documentation and audit evidence. We covered SA 230 on audit documentation in our first session. Then second session, we covered SA 500. The name is what? Audit evidence, right? So whatever are your queries, you can send in your queries that I'll be taking as and when the relevant topic will come. Okay? So students, if you remember, let me just share the screen with you. In our last session, we did the various audit procedures that an auditor performs while conducting an audit. And I told you that these audit procedures will remain the same throughout the conduct of audit. Whether the auditor is performing risk assessment procedures, whether the auditor is performing test of controls, or whether the auditor is performing substantive procedures, right? So auditor will perform something, and what is that something? Audit procedures. However, depending upon the circumstances or the situation or the purpose for which that audit procedure has been used, it may be called a risk assessment procedure when it is used to, identify and assess the risk of material misstatement in terms of what? SA 315, right? And when the auditor is taking the internal controls, see, test of controls and substantive procedures, risk assessment procedures will be doing all in detail. But this brief foundation as to what exactly an auditor does when he's performing risk assessment procedures or test of controls or substantive procedures, whereby I have told you that the procedures are the same, but the nomenclature will change according to the purpose for which the audit procedure has been used, right? The various audit procedures that we have discussed much in detail in our last sessions, these are what? Inspection, external confirmation, analytical procedures, inquiry, observation, recalculation, and reperformance. We have discussed each of them in detail. So students are saying they are missing my lectures. Oh, that's good. So this week we have a lecture like on Wednesday, Friday, and then Sunday also. Okay? We'll be covering this chapter in great detail. Okay? So now a very favorite query of yours as to ma'am, what is NTE? Nature, timing, extent of audit procedures. Okay? So I'll start my class, and I'm very happy that students are saying, many of the students are saying that ma'am, we have done our homework. That's good. Right? So what is NTE of audit procedures? Now we know that whatever the auditor is doing in order to obtain an audit evidence is what? Audit procedure, right? So what is the nature, timing, and extent? Students, if you remember in your chapter number 2, under SA 300, thereby you learn about development of an audit plan. It was mentioned that the audit plan should include a description of 3 things. The planned nature, timing, extent of risk assessment procedures. Remember? Second was the planned nature, timing, extent of further audit procedures, right? So what is that nature, timing, and extent of be it risk assessment procedure or further audit procedure? Now you know that these all are what? Audit procedures. Okay? So what is meant by nature? So when I'm saying that something is the nature of audit procedure, I want to say that if you have to determine the nature of audit procedure, you have to determine that what is the purpose behind performing an audit procedure. whether the auditor wants to check the internal controls or whether he wants to check what? The financial statements. So I can say that what is the purpose? What is the purpose of performing an audit procedure? And more specifically, what type of audit procedure the auditor is going to perform. So when we say that the audit plan should include a description of the planned nature, timing, extent of audit procedure. So nature means that what is the purpose, why the auditor wants to perform a particular type of procedure, that auditor needs to plan well in advance, right? So I've mentioned that purpose can be what? Test of control. And we will be seeing that test of control is what? It is what? Checking the internal controls of an organization, right? And what are substantive procedures? When financial statements are checked in detail, that is called substantive procedure, right? So we have already seen here that test of control is what? Checking of internal control, and substantive procedure is checking the financial statement, whereby substantive procedure consists of test of details and substantive analytical procedures. Okay? This entire chart will be covering today in detail. As of now, try to understand that by the nature, it is meant that what is the purpose of performing an audit procedure. There need to be a purpose now, whether the auditor wants to obtain an audit evidence with respect to the financial statements or the internal controls of the organization, and more specifically, what type of audit procedure. Is it inspection? Is it external confirmation, observation, recalculation, reperformance? What type of audit procedures, right? So now let me just ask you the first question from my side today, that tell me, if the assessed risk, and where the auditor has assessed is under SA 315, tell me, suppose the assessed risk is high, right? Now, an auditor wants to look at he's examining the debtors of his client organization. So my first option is, will he only inspect the documents, or will he also confirm the terms and conditions of the agreements? That is, will he also perform what? External confirmation audit procedure. So when the assessed risk is high, auditor feels that with respect to the debtors, the risk of material misstatement, the chances is high. He assesses a risk of material misstatement with respect to the debtor balances of the client organization. So it might be possible that the auditor, applying his professional judgment, he decides that, okay, only inspection of the debtor's balance or external confirmation is not sufficient. I will confirm the terms and conditions from the debtors. I will inquire them also. Now just have a look. What is the purpose? The purpose is what? To check the financial statements. That is, he's performing substantive procedures. And more specifically, what type? He's inspecting also, he's obtaining external confirmation also, and he's inquiring also, right? So, and students are saying that since there is high risk, auditor will confirm the terms and conditions also. So, can you see that the assessment of auditor's assessment about the risk of material misstatement under SA 315, it decides as to what is going to be the nature of the audit procedures. Now let us take another example. Let's say the assessed risk is low, right? So auditor may, after applying his professional judgment, he may decide that the assessed risk is low. What I'll do, I'll check the internal controls, and thereafter I'll not do the checking in detail. I'll perform certain analytical procedures. Now what are analytical procedures? Calculation of ratios. So what type of audit procedure he's going to perform? Maybe while checking the internal controls, he'll perform inquiry, he'll perform inspection, and he is going to perform what? Analytical procedures. So based on the auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement, based on what kind of item or assertion of the financial statement the auditor is going to check, he will based on his professional judgment, determine the nature of the audit procedure. So what is meant by nature? What is the purpose behind performing an audit procedure, and more specifically, what type of audit procedure the auditor is going to perform. Now, timing is going to be very simple for you. See, at what time the audit procedure is going to be performed with respect to a particular item of financial statement. Is it to be performed on a particular date or for a length of time, right? So it can be on an interim date, mid of the year, right? Or it can be at period end, right? So depending upon what item of financial statement the auditor is going to, check, and based on his assessment of risk, see, if the risk of material misstatement is going to be high, the auditor may intend to check the transactions throughout the period, right? And students, just give me an example, like in which case will the auditor is not having any option that he may go for, checking throughout the period. He will go for checking at the end of the period. I've given you. Okay, I'll continue. Meanwhile, I'll get your answers. So I can say when the inventory count of an organization is taking place, I've told you already that conducting the inventory count is the responsibility of the management. We as an auditor, we need to attend that physical inventory count that is being performed by the employees or personnel of the organization, right? Now, if the management, they decided that on 31st, they will be conducting the inventory count. So we will be attending that at that time only, right? And yeah, students are saying correct, inventory count correct. And tell me, what can be the third option? I have not mentioned it because I want you people to just, think when the audit procedure is to be performed. It can be in mid of the year. It can be at the period end. And students, can it be an unannounced date? Unannounced date. Example can be what? Your surprise check of cash. Ria has given the example of cash balance. So unannounced date can also come, whereby the auditor may, at any random date, he may check the cash balances without informing the organization as to that on this date we are going to check the cash balances. Okay? So what timing? So when in the plan the auditor needs to include the description of the nature, time of the audit procedures. Nature, now you know what purpose, what is type of audit procedures he is going to perform, and more specifically at what time he is going to perform. Okay? And the third word is what? Extent. That is what quantity of audit procedure you are going to perform with respect to a particular item of the financial statement. The auditor may consider materiality. He may consider his assessment of risk of material misstatement in order to determine as to what is the extent of checking with respect to a particular item. And when he's checking, what he's doing, he's performing an audit procedure. So what is the extent of audit procedure? The extent of checking, the quantity of audit procedures, the auditor, depending upon his assessment of materiality, the risk of material misstatement, applying his professional judgment, he may determine it, right? So this was the concept of nature, timing, and extent. So when an auditor is planning, he needs to include a description of all these things. That what is the nature of audit procedures he is going to perform, at what time is he going to perform, and to what extent is he going to perform the audit procedures. So I hope now all of yours query with respect to NTE of audit procedures, that is nature, time, extent of audit procedure, is resolved. And further we'll be discussing all these elements in detail with respect to, say, test of control, with respect to substantive procedures. But as of now, tell me whether with respect to audit procedures it is clear or not. Is it clear? Charu, I'll take your query later on, as and when we will do risk assessment procedures and further audit procedures. And Ria is saying, ma'am, very much clear. Good. So NTE of audit procedures. Now I told you that this chart, that is risk, that is what? That audit procedures consist of risk assessment procedures and further audit procedures. Then further audit procedures further consist of what? Test of controls and substantive procedures. And substantive procedures are further divided as test of details and substantive analytical procedures. And today we will be having a look at this division also. As to test of details is also further divided into two parts. Okay? So we'll move step by step. And students, please reply as to whether NTs of audit procedure is clear or not. Okay? So risk assessment procedures. Okay? I'm assuming that you have attentively listened to your lecture sessions on chapter number 2, whereby essay 315 was discussed. Further, it will be discussed in detail in your chapter number 4. Okay? But for the purpose of this chapter, let me just try to explain this to you. Okay? So risk assessment procedures. See, as the name suggests, what is auditor doing? He is assessing the risk, right? And in order to assess the risk, auditor is what? He is performing certain procedures. And students, if you remember, I told you that the definition of risk assessment procedure or test of control or substantive procedures, it is going to start with the word, these are what? Audit procedures. Because now we all know that almost these are same depending upon the purpose for which we are using them. So what are risk assessment procedures? And auditor performs it under essay 315. Now quickly, what is the name of essay 315 for all those who have gone through, who have learned chapter number 2? And here again, I'll stop and I'll remind you that learning is very important. Okay? So chapter number 1 and chapter number 2 have already been finished. So please, you must have understood it. Now start learning also. Okay? For all those who have not learned yet. So essay 315 is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. And when I say through understanding the entity and its environment, it includes what? The internal control of the client. Okay? So at this level, when the auditor is assessing the risk of material misstatement, he has to perform various audit procedures. Right? ठीक है, audit procedures तो करनी है. Why? To obtain an understanding of entity, its environment, including the entity's internal control. Yes, ma'am, this is also clear because this is clear from the name of essay 315 itself. ठीक है, क्यों करना है? To identify and assess the risk of material misstatement, and now we know that risk of material misstatement can be whether due to fraud and error. At the financial statement and the assertion level. Now, what is financial statement and assertion level? See, we as an auditor, we give our opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Okay? So, we as auditor, we have to give our expert opinion on the financial statement as a whole. But students, the financial statement of any organization, it consists of various financial information. That is various individual assertions. Now, what is assertion? Abhi ke liye, I have already given you understanding. That is whatever information is given in the financial statements by the management is what assertion. ठीक है? Rest I'll be discussing this topic in the second half of this session. ठीक है? So we as an auditor, we have to give our opinion on the financial statement as a whole. And we know that financial statement consists of various financial information, or I can say assertion. So unless and until I as an auditor, I'm sure about each and every individual item of the financial statement, I cannot give my opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Why? Because this financial statement is made up of various individual assertions. Okay? So when I as an auditor, I am giving an opinion on the financial statement as a whole, and in order to do that, I have to check all the assertions. So I, as an auditor, when I'm assessing the risk of material misstatement, I will assess that risk at the financial statement level and assertion level, right? Now let us try to understand this example with this concept with the help of an example. Dekho. Now what happens is, let's say XYZ Limited is my client, okay? And it has various components which are in various Australian subsidiaries, okay? Now when XYZ Limited consolidates the financial statement, right? It is required to convert the financials of the subsidiary into INR. So if the foreign exchange rate that is used to convert such data into INR, if that is incorrect, so that has an impact on the financial statement as a whole. The entire financial statement of XYZ Limited is not reflecting a true and fair view, right? So as a whole, I am going to check my financial statements of my client. Let's look at the example with respect to assertion level. Let's say with respect to plant and machinery, the depreciation is not calculated correctly. So is this going to impact my all the assertions of the financial statement? No. It is going to impact the depreciation or the plant and machinery balance. The depreciation that is coming in the P&L and the plant and machinery balance that is coming in the balance sheet. Okay? So is it affecting all the assertions that are appearing? No. However, in our earlier example, that is going to impact all the assertions of the financial statement. So an auditor has to assess the risk of material misstatement, and how he does that. Now we know he understands the entity and its environment, including the internal control. And he has to do that for the financial statement as a whole and at the assertion level. Individual items से क्या related है risk, and for the financial statement as a whole क्या risk है for a particular client, the auditor needs to identify and assess that risk. ठीक है? So that is why, students, you will see कि this financial statement level, this will not come in definition of test of control or substantive procedures. And what will be the reason, I'll tell you there. But with respect to risk assessment procedures, just try to understand. See, for all those who have understood SA 315 and who now have already learned the name of SA 315, now this concept is going to be a cakewalk, right? Because what is the name of SA 315? See, identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. ठीक है? And what are risk assessment procedures? ये सब करने के लिए जो भी audit procedures auditor perform करता है, ये सब करने के लिए जो भी audit procedures auditor perform करता है, those are what? Risk assessment procedures. So let us have a look at the definition of risk assessment procedures again. Audit procedures performed. Audit procedures are always what? Performed to obtain an understanding of entity and environment, including entity's internal control, to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement at financial statement and assertion level. The auditor is assessing as to what is the risk of material misstatement for the financial statement as a whole and for individual items of the financial statement. Why? Because we need to give our opinion on the financial statement as a whole, and this is not possible unless and until we examine each and every individual item, each and every individual assertion that is being reflected in the financial statement. And how the auditor does that? by obtaining the understanding of entity, the entity's environment, and the entity's internal control. Here, auditor is obtaining a general understanding as to what is the environment of the entity, what is the internal control. So I can say that auditor may perform inquiry as audit procedure. He may perform what? Inspection, right? He may also perform analytical procedures, that is calculation of ratios and comparing the trends and ratios, right? I can also say he may perform observation. अभी क्या कर रहा है ऑडिटर? ही इज ऑब्टेनिंग अ जनरल अंडरस्टैंडिंग. कैसे होएगा? इंक्वायर करेगा ना मैनेजमेंट से, दैट मैनेजमेंट टेल मी व्हाट, इफ यू रिमेंबर एस 315 इन चैप्टर नंबर 2, knowledge of the client business, वो कैसे आएगा? Inquire, he may inquire the management, and now you'll see this, what is inquiry? This is one of the audit procedure, but now he's performing it to what? For assessing the risk of material misstatement. So I can say he's performing a risk assessment procedure. ठीक है? He may inspect the documents, last year का, इस year का financial statements compare कर सकता है. He may perform certain ratios that the other companies in the similar industry, they are earning इतना GP, they have इतना GP ratio, my client is having itna, why there is a difference, right? And he may, observe. Okay? So risk assessment procedures are the audit procedures which are performed to do the work that has been mentioned under SA 315. Okay? So is it clear? And I'm impressed students have, learned the name of SA 315. Number of students have given me correct answers. Okay? So what is the name? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. And dear students, when an auditor is understanding the entity and its environment, it includes the internal control of that organization also. Okay? So this was about risk assessment procedures. In a very simple language, कोई भी procedure that the auditor is performing, क्यों? In order to assess the risk of material misstatement. ठीक है? किस level पे? At financial statement and assertion level. कैसे? By obtaining an understanding of entity and its environment, including the internal control. So I hope this is clear. Clear. ठीक है. Now, once the auditor performs the risk assessment procedures, that is, once the auditor assesses the risk of material misstatement under SA 315, then the auditor responds to such risk under SA 330. What is the name of the SA? The auditor's responses to assessed risk. और कहाँ पे assess किया है? SA 315 में. ठीक है? So SA 315 वाला जो assessment है, the assessment of risk that auditor has done in SA 315, under SA 315, it acts as a basis for auditor to respond to those risks under SA 330. ठीक है? So further audit procedures, and now we know that be it risk assessment procedure, be it test of control, substantive procedures, वो होता क्या है? Audit procedures. ठीक है? So let us just have a look at this. ठीक है? अभी तक what we have done, we have understood risk assessment procedures. ठीक है? कि risk assessment procedures होता क्या है? ठीक है? So risk assessment procedures क्या होता है? होता audit procedures ही है, but to assess the risk. Try to understand the concepts logically. And you will see the magic that you will be able to write in the correct language. ठीक है? Try to visualize whatever has been written in a module, whatever discussions we have ना, तो उसको try to just remember it in the language that I am telling to you. Then only you will be able to, learn the correct language. So risk assessment procedures आ गया. Now, in order to respond to such a risk assessment, auditor will perform further audit procedures. ठीक है? Under SA 330. And further audit procedures consist of two things. First is what? Test of controls. And second is what? Substantive procedures. Okay. So first we'll be discussing what? Test of controls. Now, as the name suggests, test of controls. Test of what? Test of internal controls that have been implemented by the management. Now, you may ask me that, ma'am, when you were telling us about the risk assessment procedures, you said that auditor will obtain an understanding of the entity and its environment, including the internal control, right? Now, why again test of control here in order to respond to those risks? Students, see, under SA 315, when the auditor was identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement, he was obtaining a general understanding about the entity and its internal control, right? And thereby he decided that, okay, I intend to rely on the internal control of an organization, okay, of the client organization. Now, SA 330 says that auditor, before relying on the internal control of an organization, what is meant by relying on the internal control? It means that auditor is feeling that, okay, the internal controls are good. I will check the financial statements on sample basis, considering materiality and everything. Since the internal controls are good, I'll rely on them. And with respect to few account balances or transactions, considering my materiality level, my professional judgment, since I am relying on internal control, I'll check these on what? Sample basis. So, dear auditor, before you are going to reduce your level of checking of financial statement, please, you are giving an expert opinion. You are relying on the internal controls of an organization. Please be doubly sure about them. That is why before applying the substantive procedures, what are substantive procedures? Checking of financial statements in detail. Okay? So before doing that, auditor will have to check the internal control. See, when he was obtaining an understanding under SA 315, he obtained a general understanding. Okay? Now tell me, he obtained a general understanding that let's go back to our all-time favorite example. That suppose traveling bills are to be signed. So the organization has an internal control that whenever the traveling bills, the amount exceeds 5,000, it will be signed by what? 2 authorized signatories. Okay? So auditor feels that, okay, this control is good. Applying his professional judgment, materiality, under SA 315, he intends to rely on the internal control with respect to traveling expenses. Okay? Now, here auditor will check that. How? He will check the internal control. It might happen that the bills are signed by 2 authorized signatories if they exceed 5,000. He may come across many situations where the bill amount exceeded 5,000, but since one of the authorized signatory was not present on that day, it was still signed by one authorized signatory, right? So are the internal controls operating effectively? No. They are not operating effectively. Yes, they have been implemented. Tabhi to auditor decided to rely on internal control under SA 315, right? Now he will be doubly sure because based on these checking, now he is going to reduce his extent of checking of what? The financial statement, because he might go for what? Sample checking. ठीक है, तो वी आर गिविंग एन एक्सपर्ट ओपिनियन. ऐसे थोड़ी ना इंटरनल कंट्रोल्स पे रिलाई कर लेंगे. वी नीड टू बी डबली श्योर अबाउट व्हाट, वेदर दीज आर ऑपरेटिंग इफेक्टिवली और नॉट. ठीक है, लेट्स टेक अनदर एग्जांपल. ठीक है, दिस इज नॉट अ फाइनेंशियल कंट्रोल एग्जांपल, बट लेट मी जस्ट एक्सप्लेन दिस टू यू. Auditor finds that CCTV cameras are being installed in the factories. ठीक है, so auditor was like, ठीक है, अच्छा सिस्टम है, CCTVs हैं, सब कुछ कैप्चर हो रहा है. But when he actually checked the internal control, he found that power failure is a very common feature in that area, and there is no power backup. Now tell me, ठीक है, internal controls are implemented effectively, are implemented by the organization. Are they operating effectively? No. So before relying on the internal control, auditor being an expert, he's going to, decide his extent of checking while performing substantive procedures. So before that, he will have to perform the test of control, which is nothing but testing the internal controls. So now you may also ask me that, ma'am, are we going to give an opinion on the internal control of an organization? No. If you remember the definition of audit, it is what? Independent examination of financial information. But my dear students, our assessment about how the internal controls are, whether they are operating effectively or not, it will decide our extent of substantive procedures. कि कितना checking करना है. If controls are good, as an auditor, I may decide to reduce my extent of checking. And if internal controls are not operating effectively, I may not go for sample checking. I may go for checking in detail. So we as an auditor, as such, we are not giving our opinion on internal control. But yes, our extent of checking as per substantive procedure depends upon whether internal control are operating effectively. That is why we need to perform audit procedures to check the internal controls. Now let us have a look. See, this was the foundation, the basis, okay, why we are performing internal control. Now the definition, as I've already told you, these are what? Audit procedures. So the definition starts with the word audit procedures designed. Okay, why? To evaluate the operating effectiveness of controls. Which controls? Internal control. So we are going to check whether when the internal controls are operating, whether they are effective in doing something. What something? Whether the internal controls are effective in preventing or detecting. Okay? Preventing or detected. And if it has been detected, then correcting material misstatement at assertion level. Now, very important. See, these words are very important. Just try to understand, and I'm sure you are going to find it very interesting. See, now, first of all, why assertion level in this definition? Hota kya, we have understood that auditor, before reducing the extent of substantive procedures, if he intends to rely on the internal control, he needs to be doubly sure that whether internal controls are operating effectively. ठीक है. Now, what is meant by operating effectively? It means that it should be the internal control, जिस purpose के लिए लगाया ना, वो solve हो जाए. ठीक है. At the assertion level. Tell me who implements the internal control? I need answers quickly. Who implements internal control? Is it the auditor or the management? Sandeep, Vivek, Tannu, Pooja, Parth, I need answers. Charu, send me your replies. Who implements the internal control? So it is the management. Hana? Management is preparing financial statements. Yes, correct. Management. Management is implementing internal control. Hana? Just try to imagine, can there be an internal control for the financial statement as a whole? कि एक internal control लगाया और financial statement will reflect a true and fair view. There will be no fraud and error. ऐसा कोई internal control हो सकता है? This is first A. ठीक है. And B, your management will have to apply or implement internal control with respect to every item of the financial statement or on every assertion, like sales के लिए अलग internal control, purchases के लिए अलग, assets के लिए अलग, liabilities के लिए अलग, and उसमें भी assets में plant and machinery पे अलग, land and building पे अलग. This is first, where I'm saying that applying one internal control on the financial statement as a whole is possible. Is it possible first? Or the second situation is possible, whereby the auditor, the management will have to apply the internal control with respect to each and every assertion that is appearing in the financial statement. So students are saying, ma'am, first situation is not possible. ऐसा तो हो ही नहीं सकता ना, that A control लगाया और financial statement ठीक आ गए. नहीं, that is not possible. है ना? तो management will apply the internal control with respect to each and every assertion of the financial statement. So when we are checking the internal control, we will be checking it at the assertion level itself now. फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट पे तो एज सच कोई इंटरनल कंट्रोल लगा ही नहीं है ना, एज अ होल की फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट ठीक से है। तो जब इंटरनल कंट्रोल को चेक करने हैं तो इफ दे हैव बीन इम्प्लीमेंटेड एट द एजर्शन लेवल, तो चेकिंग भी तो एजर्शन लेवल पे ही होगा ना, राइट? सो दैट इज व्हाई हियर यू विल नॉट सी व्हाट फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट लेवल. सो अभी मेजर पार्ट ऑफ दिस डेफिनेशन इज लेफ्ट, बट लेट अस रीड इट अगेन. Audit procedures designed, क्यों? To evaluate the operating effectiveness of control. ये भी समझ आता है कहाँ पे? At assertion level. अब assertion level पे internal control को क्या करना है? It should be able to या तो prevent, it should be able to prevent that material statement. CCTVs है ना, कोई चोरी नहीं करेगा, तो prevent करना है. और डिटेक्ट एंड करेक्ट, किसी ने चोरी कर लिया तो उसके अगेंस्ट एक्शन आएगा, है ना? डिटेक्ट एंड करेक्ट मटीरियल मिसस्टेटमेंट. ठीक है. सी व्हेन आई गिव एग्जांपल ऑफ सीसीटीवी, दिस इज नॉट अ financial internal control as such. ठीक है. But I hope you are able to understand preventing, detecting and correcting. Either prevent or detect, और detect हो गया तो उसके बाद it should be corrected. ठीक है. So now let us try to read this definition again. Audit procedures designed to evaluate operating effectiveness of controls. Controls तो हैं, तभी तो अंडर ऐसे 315 ऑडिटर इंटेंडेड टू रिलाई, है ना? बट वेदर दे आर ऑपरेटिंग इफेक्टिवली और नॉट, है ना? किसमें? इन प्रिवेंटिंग और डिटेक्टिंग एंड करेक्टिंग material misstatement at assertion level. Quickly tell me whether this definition, I have divided it into 4 parts, whether it is clear or not, or is there any doubt? ठीक है. So what are tests of control? Again, these are audit procedures designed to evaluate operating effectiveness of controls in preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement at assertion level. Now tell me, if under SA 315 I decide that I will not rely on the internal control, should I under SA 330 check these internal control in detail? Quickly tell me, what is my query to you? That if an auditor decides under SA 315, when he was identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, that I will not rely on the internal control. This is my strategy. I'm not going to rely on the internal control. I'm going to do all the substantive procedures. ठीक है? Now, if the auditor decides so, should the auditor devote his time and his team towards checking the internal control of the client organization? Quickly, I need answers. I have, the auditor has decided under 315. So students have said no, ma'am. So correct. So if I ask you that when will an auditor perform the test of control, so first can be what? When the auditor intends to rely on internal control under his assessment, when he was assessing the risk of material misstatement under SA 315. So first can be this point. ठीक है. Secondly, student, it might be possible na, that let's say there are lakhs of transactions. So performing only substantive procedures. And what is performance of substantive procedures? Abhi ke liye I have told you that checking all the financial information. So that might not be possible now. So I can say that if only substantive procedures won't give me sufficient appropriate audit evidence, then based on the materiality concept, based on the risk of assessment of risk with respect to particular assertions, I as an auditor, I may perform the test of control. Why? Because in those areas, I will have to rely on the internal controls. So my first point is, when I will check the test of control, first point, when under SA 315 the auditor intends to rely on internal control. अगर वहीं पे decide कर लिया कि I'll not rely, फिर थोड़ी ना time and team को waste करेंगे in order to check the test internal controls. ठीक है. And secondly, when applying only substantive procedures will not give me sufficient appropriate audit evidence. ठीक है. So students are saying no ma'am, we will not do that, because see Pooja is writing it correctly, because SA 330, the procedures are performed under SA 330 as a response to the risk assessed under SA 315. Hana? So SA 315 gives you a basis, a foundation as to what all procedures you are going to perform under SA 330. Okay? So I can say that when to check IC, we will have a look at the module once we cover this topic. But when to check in IC, when auditor intends to rely on IC, and where does the auditor assess such thing? Under SA 315. And substantive procedures alone cannot provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Now you all should know that audit evidence is always what? Sufficient and appropriate at assertion level. अगर ऐसा कुछ होता है तो auditor will check the internal control. अगर rely नहीं करना है तो क्यों check करना है ना? And same way अगर substantive procedures ही perform करने हैं throughout the audit, but अगर वो sufficient appropriate audit evidence नहीं देंगे तो auditor will have to check the internal controls. ठीक है? So let us just have a look at the module जितना भी आज किया है. I hope you are able to understand. See, risk assessment procedures. So risk assessment procedures refers to audit procedures performed, ठीक है, क्यों? To obtain an understanding of entity and its environment, including entity's internal control. Okay, see, this is the first part. This is the second part, ठीक है. क्यों करना है? To identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. Okay, whether due to fraud and error, so now you know. At the financial statement and the assertion level. I hope you are able to understand each and every word of this definition and why various words like financial statement, assertion level, why these words have been used. Okay? Keep on sending your feedback whether you are able to understand or not. Now further audit procedures. These comprise of what? Test of controls and substantive procedures. What are test of controls? These are what audit procedures designed, ठीक है, क्यों? To evaluate the operating effectiveness of control, ठीक है, किसमें? In preventing or detecting at correcting material misstatement, ठीक है, at what level? At assertion level. I hope now you know that why not financial statement level, why assertion level, because the management will implement the internal control for each and every assertion of the financial statements. ठीक है? The auditor shall design and perform test of controls to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence as to operating effectiveness when. So I can say why auditor will perform. Just a minute. So I can say when auditor will perform what? IC. So two situations are there. Auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement at assertion level. Now what is this? SA 315 includes an expectation. Why? Because वहां पे एक general understanding लिया था ना internal control का, that controls are operating effectively. That is, auditor intends to rely on operating effectiveness of controls in determining what? NTE of substantive procedures. Because if you remember, I told you why auditor will check. Because we are telling to the auditor that auditor, listen, you are going to reduce the extent of your checking. Your NTE of substantive procedures. What is substantive procedure? Checking of financial statement. This is going to be decided with respect to what? Internal control. So in order to use the internal control, in order to rely on the internal control, पहले check तो कर लो whether they are operating effectively or not. And second situation is what? When substantive procedure alone cannot provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence at the assertion level. I gave you example of what? Let's say the volume of transaction is very high. So applying only substantive procedure will not give you sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So auditor will first check the internal control. And students, when the auditor decides to, rely on the internal control, he needs to obtain higher level of assurance. What is assurance? Confidence. About what? About the operating effectiveness of the controls. है ना? उसके बाद ही तो he will be able to use those internal controls and he'll be able to decide the NTE or the nature, timing, extent of the substantive procedures. ठीक है? So clear जितना भी पढ़ा है अभी तक. Now let us see what is meant by nature and extent. Extent क्या होता है? कितनी हद तक चेकिंग करनी है, कितनी क्वांटिटी ऑफ ऑडिट प्रोसीजर्स परफॉर्म करने हैं, है ना? So Menon, I hope this word extent is clear. कितना ऑडिट प्रोसीजर एक पर्टिकुलर assertion पे करना है, ठीक है? That is extent. अब पर्टिकुलर assertion को कितने हद तक चेकिंग करना है, कितने ऑडिट प्रोसीजर्स इसके ऊपर लगाने हैं, कितने टाइम के लिए चेकिंग करने हैं, सैंपल उठाना है, कितने नंबर ऑफ ऑब्जर्वेशंस लेने हैं. सो व्हाट इज ऑल दीज आर व्हाट एक्सटेंट ऑफ कंट्रोल ऑफ checking. ठीक है? So now nature, extent and timing is also mentioned. So first of all, let us discuss the nature and extent of internal control. Nature and extent. See, now without looking at the screen, tell me, when you want to check the internal control, what according to you is the one audit procedure that comes to your mind? ठीक है? कि आपको देखना है कि कैसे सिस्टम वर्क करता है, क्या क्या इंटरनल कंट्रोल है. पहला ऑडिट प्रोसीजर क्या आता है माइंड में? क्विकली सेंड इन योर रिप्लाईज. इट स्टार्ट्स विद आई. Send in your replies. So, see, as an auditor, when I want to check the internal control, see, first of all, तो I'm going to inquire the management ना कि management बताओ कैसे work होता है. Yes, inquiry. So, Astha, Charu, and Vivek. ठीक है? Observation is also correct, Riya, but we will discuss just now. Inquiry. First of all, I am going to inquire. So, if you remember, what was the nature when we discussed in audit procedures? So, it was purpose and time. Purpose and type. ठीक है? So, when I am performing the test of control, purpose तो clear है ना कि इंटरनल कंट्रोल को चेक करना है. सो व्हाट टाइप ऑफ ऑडिट प्रोसीजर आई एम गोइंग टू परफॉर्म. सो इंक्वायरी तो करना ही पड़ेगा ना, तभी तो इंटरनल कंट्रोल के बारे में पता चलेगा. हु हैज इम्प्लीमेंटेड दैट? मैनेजमेंट. So I'll inquire the management. ठीक है? But if you remember, we discussed in our last class when we were discussing the various audit procedures that inquiry alone does not provide you sufficient appropriate audit evidence. इंक्वायरी के साथ कुछ और तो करना पड़ेगा. मतलब इट विल नॉट हैपन दैट मैनेजमेंट विल से आवर इंटरनल कंट्रोल्स आर वेरी गुड, देखो ऐसे ऐसे मेल आ जाता है, देखो ऐसे ऐसे साइन होता है. ठीक है, इंक्वायरी तो करेंगे, बट साथ में इंस्पेक्शन भी तो कर सकते हैं ना डॉक्यूमेंट्स का. ठीक है, ये इंटरनल कंट्रोल है, जस्ट गिव मी द मैनुअल. साथ में ऑब्जर्वेशन भी तो कर सकते हैं ना. अच्छा, दिस इज द वे द सिस्टम परफॉर्म्स. ओके, यू आर looking at the process being performed by others, है ना. You may also re-perform कि अच्छा ऐसे ये वाला रिजल्ट आता है, आपने ये इंटरनल कंट्रोल लगाया हुआ है, तो ठीक है, लेट मी जस्ट हैव अ लुक, मैं भी री-परफॉर्म करके देखता हूँ. वी डिस्कस अबाउट व्हाट BRS, है ना. सो एनी इंटरनल कंट्रोल दैट हैज बीन इम्प्लीमेंटेड, इंक्वायरी यू विल बी डूइंग. Along with that, since inquiry alone does not provide you sufficient appropriate audit evidence, you may, perform other procedures like inspection, observation, or re-performance. ठीक है? And what extent of checking you are going to perform with respect to internal controls, you will see that how the controls are applied at relevant times. We will read this through the module. Abhi ke liye try to understand. Now, at relevant times, now let us go back to our traveling expense wala example. So, any expense exceeding 5,000 needs to be signed by 2 authorized signatories. So, auditor may inquire the management that management tell me when one of the authorized signatory is not present. So, during that relevant time, how does this internal control, in that time also the internal control operates effectively? Right? So during that relevant time, and if I take the example of CCTV cameras, so when there are power failures at that relevant time, how the internal controls, do they still operate effectively? Right? So how controls are applied at relevant time? The consistency with which the controls are applied, ऐसा तो नहीं है कि सिर्फ अप्रैल एंड मई के मंथ में तो सारे इंटरनल कंट्रोल्स वर्क करते हैं, जैसे जैसे ईयर एंड होता है कोई इंटरनल कंट्रोल वर्क नहीं करता है. सो कंसिस्टेंसी आई कैन से थ्रू आउट द पीरियड, वेदर दे आर वर्किंग थ्रू आउट द पीरियड, राइट? And by whom and by what means? Who has implemented? Is there an internal team or you have outsourced it to some IT team? Okay? Let's say your software, accounting software, it is having a number of internal control. Is it developed in-house or you have outsourced it to any IT company? Why? Because see, the risk associated with all these things, if it is internal, the risk will be different. If it is external, the risk will be different. Hana? So when we are deciding the nature and extent of test and control, first of all, what type of audit procedure is to be performed? Okay? Is it inquiry? Yes. If it is inquiry, along with that, what other procedures are to be performed in combination with inquiry? Then how the controls are applied at relevant times. I gave you 2 examples of relevant time. Then the consistency, whether they have been applied throughout the year. ऐसा तो नहीं है जब ऑडिटर आता है तभी वर्क करते हैं, ऐसा तो नहीं है स्टार्ट ऑफ द ईयर और एंड ऑफ द ईयर में वर्क करते हैं. During the year, the internal controls are not operating effectively. By whom and by what means? Okay? And in extent, auditor will also have to decide as to whether he is going to check any indirect control. Let me try to explain this to you with the help of an example. Let's say the credit sales, the accounting system of the client is such that whenever the credit sale, they exceeds the authorized limit, some exceptions report are generated. Okay? So whenever the credit sales, let's say the limits have been fixed that okay, with respect to this debtor, 1 lakh is the limit. With respect to this debtor, 5 lakh is the limit. So whenever that credit sales exceeds the authorized limit, the exception reports automatically gets generated. Now, what is the financial control with respect to this? That once the report has been generated, how the management is doing the follow-up, how the management is, reconciling the things or taking the corrective actions. So these are my directive controls. So whether to check the indirect control with respect to a particular assertion, also the auditor will check. With respect to what? Not assertion, with respect to a particular control, the auditor will check. ठीक है? So extent कि direct control ही check करना है या indirect भी check करना है, ठीक है? So the extent, right? So in nature and extent of test of controls, we have seen that what type of procedures, inquiry, along with that, what other procedures, how the controls are applied at relevant times. I have given you example of relevant times, ki when the power failure is there or when the authorized signatory has not come. Okay? Consistency, whether it has been applied, operating effectively throughout the year and by whom and by what means, and whether the indirect controls is also to be checked. Now, the extent of test of control, it depends upon various factors. The extent, see the nature and extent of test of control. So in designing and performing test of control, the auditor shall perform other procedures in combination with inquiry. ठीक है, किस लिए? To obtain audit evidence about the operating effectiveness. Okay, including what? How the controls were applied at relevant time, the consistency with which they were applied, by whom and by what means. Determine whether the controls to be tested depend upon other controls, that is indirect control. Okay? So I gave you example of what exception reports, that whenever the credit sale exceeds the authorized limit, exceptions reports are generated. So direct control kya ho gaya? That how the management is, reviewing such reports, how the management is taking the corrective actions. But how those report gets generated depends upon your what? General IT controls. And if so, whether it is necessary to obtain audit evidence supporting the effective operation of those indirect controls. And this is very, very important, that inquiry alone is not sufficient to test the operating effectiveness of controls. Okay? This you can read, we have discussed in detail. Okay? Now, matters the auditor may consider in determining the extent of test of control. ठीक है, अब we are testing the internal control. ठीक है, so it might be possible na, that auditor may decide as to what is the extent. Auditor will have to in fact decide as to what is the extent. So what is the extent of testing of the internal control? It depends upon various factors. So let us see them one by one. The frequency of performance of the control by the entity, as in how much time during the year, for how much period during the year the entity is using that control. See, this factor is going to impact the auditor's extent of checking ना, कि management उस internal control को use कितना कर रहा है. ठीक है. Secondly, first point was what? Management कितना बार उस control को use करता है. And second point, length of time during the audit period that auditor is relying on the operating effectiveness of control. Let's say if auditor decides कि April and May के लिए तो I'll rely on the internal control, later on ना I will June के लिए I'll check all the transactions in detail. तो क्या उस time के लिए भी auditor will check the internal control? नहीं, because he is not relying on the internal control ना, है ना. Expected rate of deviation, अगर expected rate of deviation ज़्यादा है, so auditor may check the internal controls in detail. On the other hand, अगर expected rate of deviation ज़्यादा है, auditor may feel कि ठीक है, I'll not use the internal control. ठीक है. Then the relevance and reliability of audit evidence to be obtained regarding operating effectiveness. कितना relevance and whether the audit evidence with respect to internal control is relevant and reliable, it is useful for your audit purpose or not. And let's say for this example, suppose there is a single assertion on which there are 3 controls, internal control the organization has put in. Okay? If you have already checked these 2 controls, you may, not check the third one. Simple. 2-3 control hai, 2 check kar liye, third one you may not check, or you may just check, you may check it less. So extent to which audit evidence is obtained from test of other controls relating to the assertion. A single assertion pe if there are 2-3 controls and you have already checked 2 controls, so it might be possible that your extent of checking of the third control will depend upon your checking of the other controls. Okay? So very simple point, ki what is the extent of your checking of internal control? Your say I mean auditors. So first of all, management कितना use कर रहा है internal control को. Then auditor कितना rely कर रहा है. Expected rate of deviation. What is the expected rate of deviation? Then what is the relevance and reliability of the audit evidence that is obtained, and the extent of the audit evidence that has been obtained from the test of other controls with respect to that assertion. ठीक है. And timing में तो now you know. At a particular time during the year, throughout the period, ठीक है? At a particular time के लिए I can say what? Year end. For example, your inventory count. See, when management is performing the inventory count, it is a kind of internal control only that has been put by the management on the inventory. है ना. So when management is performing that at the end of the year, तो end of the year होगा. अगर quarterly हो रहा है तो auditor can perform that quarterly. So it depends. ठीक है. So this was about what? The nature, timing and extent of test of controls. So I hope clear so far. Let us just have a look at this from the module. So timing will be a particular time or throughout the period. And the example of inventory has been given. You can just have a read. This paragraph we have discussed a number of times. ठीक है. I hope इतना clear है. Quickly send in your replies. Then only I'll start with the next topic. अभी तक we have seen what risk assessment procedures क्या होते हैं. Then we went on to discuss what further audit procedures. जिसमें first I have taken test of control और अभी we are discussing test of control only. ठीक है. So before the break I'll finish off with test of control and then after the break I'll start with what? Your substantive procedures, but abhi we are doing what? Another topic with respect to test of control. Now the topic says that if the auditor has tested the internal controls of the organization in the previous year audit, let's say ABC and Associates is a auditing firm and it is conducting the audit of XYZ Limited, and last year also ABC and Associates were the statutory auditors of XYZ Limited. Now, can ABC and Associates use the audit evidence that has been obtained during the previous year regarding the internal control? Can they use it at this time? So the answer will be yes. But see, after considering certain factors. So reliance can be there. If you remember, when we did sources of audit evidence, we saw that primary source क्या होता है? Performing the audit procedures, management expert, accounting records, है ना? And one of the point was from the knowledge from the previous audit, so that can be used, ठीक है? But with respect to relying on the audit evidence obtained in previous year, with respect to internal control, before relying on that, the auditor shall consider the following. क्या क्या consider करना है, उसी के बाद rely करना है. देखो ना, if let's say the internal control, ठीक है, that was implemented. Earlier, the accounts of the organization, they were maintained manually, है ना? उससे related सारे internal control थे. Now this year, computerized system has taken place over the manual accounting system. अब तो उसके इंटरनल कंट्रोल है ना. अभी भी थोड़ी ना अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम के इंटरनल मैनुअल अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम के इंटरनल कंट्रोल को रेफर करोगे, है ना. सो यू कैन रिलाई बट यू नीड टू कंसीडर द फॉलोइंग पॉइंट्स. So let us just have a look from the module first. So auditor shall consider. So what is the topic? Using audit evidence obtained in previous year, previous audit. In determining whether it is appropriate to use audit evidence about operating effectiveness of control obtained in previous audits, and if so, the length of the time period that may elapse before retesting a control. That is when to retest the control. The auditor shall consider the following. ठीक है. So there are 6 points. So it says that auditor, before relying or before retesting ना, been implemented कि sign होगा, mail आएगा, सब कुछ अच्छे से करना है. Now tell me, if the senior management is lenient, the senior management itself not following any internal control, will the employees be motivated to follow the internal controls? Tell me, quickly tell me yes or no. What I'm saying that if the management of the organization is itself not following the internal control, management says that ठीक है ये MD का बिल है ना, traveling expense है, कुछ नहीं होता, 5,000 से ऊपर है ना, just pass it. ठीक है. Senior management is not following the internal controls, will the employees, the other staff in the organization, will it be motivated to follow the internal control? No. है ना. So that is why it says ठीक है that last year there were internal controls, but before using your knowledge that you have obtained about internal controls during the previous year audit, consider the effectiveness of other elements of internal control. Is there a environment of honesty, integrity from the management? Is management exemplary of honesty, being integrity, being integral, working with integrity, exemplary to whom? To the staff. If management will not follow internal control, then chances are there that the staff will also not follow. So before doing that, consider the effectiveness. See, there are 3 points relating to effectiveness. So effectiveness of what? Other elements of internal control. Okay? And consider the effectiveness of general IT control as to who can access the reports. See, those controls, internal controls have been implemented. Let's say the general IT controls are not good. Anyone can, enter, anyone can manipulate the reports. So before relying on the audit evidence that you have obtained about the internal control in your previous year audit, dear auditor, please see the effectiveness of the general IT controls. Okay? And last, with respect to effectiveness, also see the effectiveness of the control and its application. That when you tested the control last year, when you tested its application, did you find any deviation? Was there a deviation? Okay? Because if last year there was a deviation, so chances are there that auditor will apply his professional judgment and an auditor may decide to retest that internal control. And is there a change of personnel? See, last year internal control were operating very effectively. The personnel who was implementing the control, who was looking after that control, was very good. Now that personnel has been changed. Okay? So can you still rely on it? Why? Because that control was operating effectively because of the personnel. Let's say there was some manual control. So that control was operating effectively because of the personnel. Now that personnel has changed. Okay? So before relying on the evidence that you have obtained regarding the internal controls operating effectiveness during your previous year audit, consider the effectiveness of 3 things, that is other elements of internal control, the general IT controls, control and its application, and if there was any deviation during the last year or if there has been a change of personnel. Okay? Auditor understood these 3 points. Also, auditor, before relying, consider, is there any risk? What risk? With respect to characteristic of the control. See, if the control is manual or the control is automated, the risk associated with both types of control is going to be different. So before using your evidence that you have obtained in the previous year, consider the risk associated with the characteristics of the control. Example can be manual or automatic, right? Also consider the risk of changing circumstances. It might be possible that the circumstances have changed, but there is lack of change in the organization. You said that, okay, the factory, at the entry and exit gate of the factory, CCTV cameras have been installed. Okay? But now 2 more gates have been constructed. Change in circumstances, but CCTVs were not put on those 2 gates. So lack of change, lack of change in case of changing circumstances. And also see if there is risk of material misstatement, if there is more risk of material misstatement, and the extent of your reliance on internal control. See, obviously, if with respect to the assertion on which the internal control has been implemented by the management, if your extent of reliance on internal control is high, okay, and that assertion is prone to risk of material misstatement, you have assessed that risk of material misstatement is there, you will obviously, after applying your professional judgment, you will retest that control. You will not rely on the previous years, your assessment about the internal control. Okay? So, and also establish the continuing relevance. For example of what? Manual to automatic. Abhi bhi manual wale control thodi na check karoge. Okay? So let us have a look at the module. So effectiveness of other elements of internal control, including control environment, entities, monitoring of control and entities, risk assessment process. ठीक है? ये सब होता क्या है? Chapter number 4 में detail में करेंगे. अभी I have told you that management, whether management has the attitude of management or the culture of integrity and honesty is prevailing in the organization. Then C point is related to effectiveness of general IT controls. And D point is related to effectiveness of control and its application, including nature, extent of deviations in the control noted in what previous audit, and whether there has been any personal change. Okay? And I told you 3 points are related to risk. What risk? Risk arising from the characteristics, including whether it is manual or automated. Then risk of whether the lack of change in a particular control poses risk due to changing circumstances, and risk of material misstatement and extent of reliance, and please establish the continuing relevance. Okay? So with this, we have finished test of control. Ekbari just have a look at that chart, and before taking a break, I'll just quickly recapitulate as to what we have done in test of control. Okay? So be with me for abhi hai 10 minutes, then I'll take a break. So what we have done here is, so test of controls we have done. Okay? So first of all, we saw कि risk assessment procedures, nature, timing, extent is clear. Nature means what is the purpose, what are the type of procedures you want to perform. Timing is, it can be interim, period end हो सकता है, unannounced date भी हो सकता है. Extent is what quantity of audit procedures you are going to perform with respect to a particular assertion. Till what extent you are going to check it. Okay? Then risk assessment procedures, I told you that audit procedures performed in order to obtain understanding of entity, its environment, including the entity's internal control. Why? To identify and assess the risk of material misstatement, whether due to fraud and error. At what levels? At financial statement and assertion level. I hope this point is clear. Then test of control is what audit procedures designed to evaluate the operating effectiveness of control. Kisme operating effectiveness in preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement at what level? At assertion level. Because now we know internal control to management will put on each and every individual assertion. तो उसको check भी तो वैसे ही करेंगे. When to check? When the auditor intends to rely. When he assesses that under SC315 he intends to rely, and when substantive procedures alone cannot provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence at the assertion level. Okay? What is the nature and extent? See, inquiry along with, in combination with other procedures, and will also check how controls are applied at relevant times, the consistency with which controls have been operating effectively, and by whom and by what means. Whether auditor needs to check the indirect control. Audit evidence lena hai with respect to indirect controls also, and that extent depends upon 5 factors. What were those? The frequency for which the management is using, the length of time for which the auditor is relying, the expected rate of deviation from the control, the relevance, reliability of the audit evidence that has been obtained with respect to operating effectiveness of control at assertion level, and the extent to which audit evidence has been obtained with respect to what? Test of other controls for that particular assertion. Timing can be at particular time or throughout the period. Example is what? Physical inventory count that takes place at the end. And yes, auditor can use, but before that he shall consider following things. What? Effectiveness of other elements of internal control, effectiveness of general IT controls, and effectiveness of what? The control and its application, any deviation which was noted in the previous year, and any personal change if has been made. The risk associated with what? Characteristic of the control, whether manual or what? Your automated. The risk of what? That there has been a change in there has been a lack of change along with what? Changing circumstances. And if the risk of material misstatement is it depends upon the risk of material misstatement and the extent of reliance on the control. So Asta is saying, ma'am, please give me example of what? The general IT control. See, suppose Asta, there has been an internal control ki whenever the tax payments has to be made with respect to let's say TDS, GST, कोई भी tax payment है ना. So management has put in an internal control that 2 days prior to that due date, a reminder mail will come. ठीक है? So auditor ने ये check किया. Now it might be possible कि whoever feeds that due date, है ना? Whoever feeds that due date, someone is using that person's ID to manipulate all those things. तो what does that mean? That the general IT controls are not good ना. Report या mail तो तभी आएगी ना when the feeding of the data is correct, and feeding of the data depends upon what the general IT controls. ऐसा तो नहीं है कि system कोई भी hack कर ले, ऐसा तो नहीं है password कोई भी hack कर ले. So depending upon what the general IT controls. ठीक है? So I hope whose doubt was this? Astha, your doubt is clear, and with this, we have finished test of controls. We have finished discussing test of controls. We will take a quick break of 10 minutes here, and then I'll be starting with substantive procedures. And most importantly, after that, we'll be doing what? Assertions. So, which is also one of your favorite queries. So, quickly, after 10 minutes, we will meet. Okay, students, I hope you all are back after the break. So, I said that test of control is finished, but a small topic is left. Let us just have a look at the topic. So, quickly tell me, chalo, you answer my question. Suppose there are certain deviations in controls. Matlab that suppose the internal control are not operating effectively in one or two situations, in one or two instances, what will you do? Will you state a withdraw from the audit engagement? Ki I'll not work. The internal controls are not working properly and I intended to rely. Or will you perform certain extra, or I can say additional audit procedures? Quickly send me additional audit procedures or withdraw. So, if there are certain deviations in the internal controls, so what will auditor do? Auditor will, first of all, he will see whether the test of controls that he is performing, whether they provide an appropriate basis for the reliance of control. That jitna bhi, whatever test of control he has done so far, whether they provide an appropriate basis or not. Okay? Then he may decide to perform additional test of controls if he finds them necessary. ठीक है? और उसके बाद भी if he feels कि नहीं, test of control से काम नहीं चलेगा, I have to perform substantive procedures, he may perform them. ठीक है? And in fact, we will see that even if test of the internal controls are good, the auditor performs a substantive procedure. The extent may vary, but auditor will perform the substantive procedures. So what was this topic? This was related to test of control only. That what specific inquiries by the auditor are required when deviations from control are detected. Deviations हैं, ठीक है. फिर क्या करना है? First of all, to see whether your test of control, whatever you have done so far, whether those are what appropriate. They provide appropriate basis for reliance on control. ठीक है. Secondly, decide as to whether additional test of controls are to be performed, and if the potential risk of material misstatement is there, then whether it needs to be addressed by using what? Substantive procedures. And now we'll be discussing in detail as to what is meant by substantive procedures. So students, today we have done risk assessment procedures and test of control. I need a quick reply from you people whether whatever we have done so far is clear or not. Okay? If there is any doubt, please let me know. So we were doing audit procedures whereby we saw that risk assessment procedures होता है जो SA 315 के अंदर auditor performs. Why? And what is the name? I'll keep on repeating the name. Why? Because I want you people to learn these names. Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment is SA 315. ठीक है? Then auditor responds to such risk under SA 330. The auditor responses to assessed risk. ठीक है? SA 330, and whereby we have done test of controls. ठीक है? Why will auditor check the internal control? Because now based on his assessment of operating effectiveness of test of control, he is going to decide the nature, timing, extent of the substantive procedures that the auditor is going to perform. Now, what is meant by substantive procedures? And now do you all definitely know that substantive procedure also start with the word what? Quickly tell me, what is going to be the first two words or three words of the definition? So, substantive procedures are what? Just a minute. Quickly tell me, substantive procedures are what? What? They are the audit procedures. So, substantive procedures. Substantive procedures are what? Audit procedures design. ठीक है? Why? See, under SA 315, when the auditor performs risk assessment procedures, He assesses the risk of material misstatement and decides whether to rely on the internal controls or not. He decides his strategy and everything. Okay? If he intends to rely on the internal control, what auditor does is before starting checking the financial statement, he checks the internal control. Okay? Because his assessment about the operating effectiveness of internal control will decide the extent of substantive procedures. If he feels that internal control are good, the auditor may go for what? Sample checking. If he feels that no, internal control are not operating effectively, auditor may go for what? Checking of all the transactions. Okay? So what is substantive procedures? So when the auditor is checking the financial statement, when he's checking whether any material misstatement is there on each and every assertion, that is what is substantive procedures. Now auditor will when an auditor is giving an opinion, I told you that auditor gives an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. So auditor wants to say, let's say with respect to P&L or income statement, auditor wants to say whether the results of operations, they give a true and fair view or not. Okay? And when the auditor is giving his opinion on balance sheet, he wants to say whether the financial position is properly shown or not. So as this auditor is giving his opinion on the overall presentation of such financial statement, but since we know that these financial statements are prepared by joining various assertions together, the auditor will have to check these assertions in order to give his opinion. So what are these assertions? These are what abhi ke liye still you just try to understand that each and every item of the financial statement that has been given in the financial statement by the management is what? Assertion. So auditor will perform his audit procedures in order to check whether these items of the financial statement are not materially misstated. So I can say substantive procedures are what? Audit procedures designed, theek hai, why? To detect a material misstatement, okay, at assertion level. ऐसा तो there cannot be any audit procedure ना कि at the financial statement as a whole किया and auditor is able to be sure as to whether financial statement reflected true and fair view. Yes, we have to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Charu, now listen to this. This was your doubt. We as auditor have to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole, that whether P&L, whether it is showing the results of operation correctly or not, whether the balance sheet is giving you the correct financial position or not, the true and fair financial position or not. So we are giving our opinion on the financial statement as a whole, but such financial statements are prepared by putting together various financial information or items, or I can say assertions. So when I as an auditor now have known as to what is the risk of material misstatement, I also know how the internal controls, whether they are operating effectively or not. Now I'm going to check based on my assessment of what risk of material misstatement and my assessment of what operating effectiveness of control. What I'm going to check? I'm going to check each and every assertion that has made up the financial statement. Why? Because my overall objective is to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. The auditor will never give an opinion if purchases theek hai, sales theek hai, nahi. Auditor will give an opinion whether the financial statement represented true and fair view. And financial statement is prepared how? By putting together various assertions, various items, various information in the financial statement. So substantive procedures are the auditor's procedures designed to detect the material misstatement at the assertion level. Now the auditor is going to check each and every assertion. What extent of checking is he going to perform? Whether he'll be just calculating the ratios, if the ICs are good or not, that we'll see, and it all depends upon what? Auditor's professional judgment. Okay? Now we have seen that substantive procedures. Okay, what are substantive procedures? Clear that auditor is now checking the financial statement, and since financial statement is made up of various assertions, so what is mentioned that audit procedures designed to detect material misstatement at assertion level. P&L में there are various assertions. Balance sheet में there are various assertions. Disclosure में there are various assertions. We as an auditor, we are giving our opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Okay? So we are performing substantive procedures at assertion level. Okay? So if you look at this chart which we have made in our last class, so substantive procedures क्या होते हैं? This you have understood. Now substantive procedures जो होते हैं, they are of two types. Test of details and substantive analytical procedures. ठीक है? So we'll be doing that. ठीक है? So now we are doing what? The first part, two parts of what? Substantive procedures, which is what? Test of details. Just a minute. Test of details and substantive analytical procedures. See, test of details, as the name suggests, test of details means you are checking each and every detail that has been given in the financial statement. You are checking the expenses, you are checking the income, you are checking the assets, you are checking the liabilities. Test of details, you are checking the disclosures. So you're checking everything in detail about the financial statement is what? Test of details. Now, what is substantive analytical procedures? When the auditor calculates the ratios, he compares the data, he's performing what? Substantive analytical procedures. And students, don't get confused between substantive procedures and substantive analytical procedures. The word analytical here is very important. Substantive analytical procedures and analytical procedures are same. Okay? But substantive procedures ke there are two bifurcation. One is what? Test of details. And the other is what? Substantive analytical procedures. Substantive analytical procedures ke liye abhi try to understand that these are what? Calculating various ratios, comparing the various trends and ratios of the company with the industry or with the previous year. And you will be doing this in detail in your chapter number 8. Essay 520, Analytical Procedures. ठीक है? अभी के लिए just try to understand that the auditor may calculate GP ratio, last year से compare कर लिया, stock turnover ratio, debtor turnover ratio, all those ratios last year से compare किया, previous the industry से compare किया, है ना? Looking at the procedures. What are substantive procedures? These are the audit procedures designed to detect material misstatement at the assertion level. And in these procedures, auditor may either perform test of details, that is, he's checking everything in detail, or he may perform substantive analytical procedure, that is ratio analysis, or he may perform a combination of both. ठीक है? He is checking each and every transaction, test of detail. He is calculating the ratios, substantive analytical procedure, or a combination of both. ठीक है? Depending upon what? Depending upon the risk assessment procedures, depending upon the internal controls. ठीक है? Now, test of details. Test of details is further divided into two things. This is vouching and verification. Now, what are these? Let us just discuss them. But before that, let me just take you through the module 1's substantive procedures. These may be defined as audit procedures designed to detect material misstatement at what? Assertion level. Substantive procedures comprise of what? Test of details or substantive analytical procedure. See, test of details में क्या आया? Classes of transactions. ठीक है? Whatever transactions have taken place during the year, account balances, whatever balances are appearing in the balance sheet, and the disclosure. So checking in detail each and every aspect of the financial statement is what? Test of detail. And substantive analytical procedure. So audit procedures, we saw risk assessment procedure, further audit procedures. For these further consist of test of control, substantive procedures. Substantive procedures further consist of test of analytical procedures, and your test of details further consist of test of transactions and your test of balances, that is verification. Now let's try to understand this test of transactions and test of balances. Now students, tell me, in the balance sheet various balances come, like plant and machinery ka closing balance will be there, inventory ka closing balance will be there. So when the auditor is verifying that balance, whether that balance has been correctly accounted for in the books of account, that is called what? Verification. Auditor, he may go and check the documentary evidences, he may observe. So when he's checking the balances that are appearing in the balance sheet, it becomes what? Your verification, right? Now a number of transactions that have taken place during the year, your purchases, sales, your cash inflow, outflow, whatever transactions that have taken place during the year, auditor is going to vouch them. What is meant by vouching? When you're examining what? The documentary evidence. So auditor will what? Vouch them. So when the auditor is performing test of details, when he's checking the substantive procedures, he is checking the transactions that have taken place during the year, and he is what? He is checking the balances that are appearing in the balance sheet. And students, tell me, how will the auditor do that? We all know, by performing what? Audit procedures. In order to, let's say, test the balances, debtors balance, auditor may call for external confirmation. Auditor may, inspect the ledgers. Auditor may inquire certain terms and conditions from the management with respect to debtors. So procedures are going to be same. अंडर SA 315 जब रिस्क असेसमेंट प्रोसीजर्स था, रिस्क को असेस करना था, ऑडिटर वांटेड टू असेस द रिस्क. When he was checking the test, when he was performing test of control, he wanted to check what? Internal control. Now everything has been done. Now he's checking what? The financial statements. Okay? Based on auditor's assessment of internal control, let's say, see, test of detail is what? You are checking everything in detail. And analytical procedures are what? You are calculating the ratios. And I've told you that a combination of both can also be used by the auditor. Now tell me, if the internal control are not good, when auditor performed test of controls and he found that the internal control are not good, tell me, will only performing the analytical procedure be sufficient? कि ठीक है, ratios वगैरह सब calculate कर दिया, will it give the correct result? What will the auditor be in a position to give the appropriate opinion? No. See, when the internal controls are not working properly, auditor will go for test of details. He is going to check. He cannot just rely on the test of control and go for sample checking and analytical procedures. In that case, the auditor will have to perform the test of details. Okay? Now, if you remember, I told you that it might be possible that IC, internal control, are very good. Okay. The internal control are very good. Still, the auditor is performing substantive procedures. Just imagine that internal controls are good, but tell me, what is the definition of audit? Audit is an independent examination of financial information. So, okay, the internal controls are good, but we are giving an expert opinion on the financial information. So even if the internal controls are good, auditor will have to perform substantive procedure, because auditor is giving what? Opinion on the financial statement. And there are two situations as to, see what is this. Irrespective of risk of material misstatement, auditor shall design and perform substantive procedure for each material class of transaction, account balance and disclosure, even if risk of material misstatement is very low, even if internal control are very good, still auditor will perform substantive procedures. Why? Because students, this assessment of risk of material misstatement is what? Judgmental. Auditor is using his professional judgment, na? It might be possible that auditor is not able to identify all risk of material misstatement. Auditor is auditor, na? After all, he is not a detective, na? So, irrespective of risk of material misstatement, even if ROMM is very low, auditor shall design and perform substantive procedure for each material class of transaction. And I'm adding here one more thing. Even if internal controls are very good, they are operating effectively throughout the period, still there are certain inherent limitations of audit of what? Internal control. Inherent limitations of internal control. It might be possible na, that management has implemented these internal control na, and you all know that fraud is always done with the intention to conceal it, right? So there might be possible that there are certain what? Inherent limitation of internal control. Example is what? Management override. Now what is meant by that? It says that it might be possible since management is implementing the internal control na, so management has the ability what? To disregard this internal control and to prepare the accounting records in a fraudulent manner. Management ने ही तो implement किया ना internal control. So it might be possible ना that management has manipulated something which auditor is not able to know. So this topic basically says that even if the risk of material misstatement is very low, even if your internal controls are good, still auditor will perform the substantive procedures. How, to what extent, whether to go for test of details or whether to perform analytical procedures, it all depends upon what? Auditor's professional judgment and auditor's judgment about what? Risk of material misstatement and internal control. But substantive procedures the auditor will have to perform. Right? Why? Because even if ROMM is less, see, the assessment of risk of material misstatement is what? It is judgmental. Auditor has applied his professional judgment. Now, it might be possible that auditor is not able to identify all risk of material misstatement. And even if IC are good, ultimately IC, the internal control are going to have their inherent limitation. And since management have applied them, management has the ability. What is meant by management override? It means ability of the management to manipulate the accounting records and disregarding the internal control. They are ignoring the internal control. It is possible. Okay? So that is the reason why auditor will always perform substantive procedures. Whether to perform test of detail, whether to perform substantive analytical procedures, or whether to perform a combination of both, it depends upon auditor's professional judgment. But there can be no case that auditor is not performing substantive procedures, because we are giving our expert opinion on the financial statements. ठीक है, सो उसका चेकिंग तो करना ही है. कम चेकिंग से इफ IC are good, the internal controller good, auditor may just perform the analytical procedures की ratio calculate कर लिया, थोड़ा बहुत sample basis पे check किया, that's all. ठीक है, but substantive procedures will be performed. There will be no case when substantive procedures are not performed. ठीक है, so this we have seen. What is meant by management override? Ability of management to manipulate accounting records and prepare fraudulent financial statement by overriding the controls. What is overriding? Disregarding. Okay, so let us just have a look at the module. See, irrespective of the assessed risk of material misstatement, what does it mean? That even if ROM, the risk of material misstatement is low, the auditor shall design and perform substantive procedures for each material class of transactions and account balances and disclosures. The requirement reflects that. क्यों करना है? I told you that ROMM is low. ठीक है, IC are good. Still auditor will perform substantive procedures. Yes. What is substantive procedures you have seen? I'm talking about these substantive procedures. ठीक है. तो even if let's try to understand from this diagram, it will help you see. Even if the assessment of risk is less, ठीक है, risk है ही नहीं, internal control are very good, then also substantive procedures perform तो करना ही पड़ेगा. टेस्ट ऑफ डिटेल करो, एनालिटिकल करो, और एनी कॉम्बिनेशन, कैसे भी करो, इट डिपेंड्स अपॉन ऑडिटर्स प्रोफेशनल जजमेंट. ठीक है. व्हाई? बिकॉज सी, the auditor's assessment of risk is judgmental and so may not identify all risk of material misstatement, है ना. So it says that ठीक है, the auditor has performed risk assessment procedures, but it might be possible ना that auditor has not identified all risk of material misstatement. And why? Because you all know there are inherent limitations in audit, है ना. There are inherent limitations of internal control also, including management override. तो ठीक है, auditor has checked the internal control, but it might be possible na that management has the auditor has not been able to look at the deficiencies in the internal control system, right? Example is what? Management override. Management itself is not following, it is disregarding the internal control. However, it is appearing to the auditor कि सब कुछ is operating effectively. ठीक है. So that is why substantive procedures तो करना ही पड़ेगा. Okay. हाँ, performing only substantive analytical procedures will be sufficient to reduce the audit risk to an acceptably low. Just a minute. Depending upon the circumstance, the auditor may determine. What the auditor may determine that whether to perform test of detail or whether to perform substantive analytical procedures or to both. So it says that performing only substantive analytical procedure, that is calculating ratios, comparing trends, investigating the fluctuations, it will be sufficient to reduce the audit risk to acceptably low level. For example, where the auditor's assessment is supported by what? Audit evidence from test of control. It want to say that if the IC are good, they are very strong, है ना. तो फिर तो ऑडिटर में परफॉर्म ओनली द एनालिटिकल प्रोसीजर्स, दैट इंटरनल कंट्रोल्स बहुत गुड है, छोटा सा ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है. Let me just calculate the substantive analytical procedures based on my knowledge I have obtained in previous audit. The client is always maintaining true and fair financial statements. So let me just calculate certain ratios. Let me perform the substantive analytical procedure and that's it. ठीक है. Or only test of details are appropriate. नहीं, the ICs are not good, है ना. I will have to check the transactions in detail. Auditor may decide that. Or a combination of substantive analytical procedure and test of details are most responsive to the assessed list. Now, what are substantive analytical procedures? I have told you, and chapter 520 SMA analytical procedures you will be doing this. And this point I will discuss because the assessment of risk of material misstatement takes into account internal control. The extent of substantive procedure may need to be increased when the results of test of controls are unsatisfactory. What does that mean? It means that SA 315 mein to auditor decided that he will rely on internal control. When he responded to those assessments under SA 330 and he performed test of controls, he found that the results are not satisfactory. There are deviations. So in that case, the auditor will have to increase the extent of substantive procedures. That is, he will have to increase his checking. He will have to perform the test of details. Clear? Now, this external confirmation topic I'll be doing later on when I'll be doing SA 505 with you. There is this small topic that substantive procedure relating to financial statement closing process. That is when statements are being closed. At that time, what substantive procedures the auditor can do? It says that you will see whether financial statements are agreeing with the underlying accounting record. Simple. This we have already discussed, and see whether material general entries and adjustment made are proper or not. ठीक है. Substantive procedures responsive to significant risk. Now tell me, let's say there is a significant risk. ठीक है. I have examined the risk of material misstatement. I have assessed the risk of material misstatement, and I found that there is a significant risk of material misstatement. Fraud risk factors are there, okay, or a number of related party transactions are there. Then internal control, okay, they are also good. Now tell me, can I just perform the substantive analytical procedures ki ratios bas calculate kiya and that's it? Or will there be a need to perform the test of details? See, when the approach to a significant risk consists only of substantive procedures, those procedures shall include what? Test of details. Auditor will have to perform test of details. Auditor will have to perform the substantive procedures which are responsive to the significant risk. What is meant by responsive to significant risk? If there are risks, auditor will respond to those risks under SA 330 in order to he'll perform those audit procedures whereby he'll be checking everything in detail. So Pooja is saying, no ma'am, we will perform test of details, and that is correct. Okay? So with this, you can just go through these examples. These are very simple and these will help, these will add on to your understanding with respect to these topics. Okay? So please, whenever you are going to read, and in fact today itself when you are going to read this module till where we have completed, you have to read each and every illustration example that has been given in your module. So let us now again look at that chart that we were discussing, the flow chart type of thing. So we were here. We started discussing with risk assessment procedures. Then we saw in further audit procedures, there are test of details, substantive procedures. Substantive procedure is what? Checking the financial statements in detail, checking the financial statements. That is checking the everything at the assertion level to detect material misstatement at assertion level. Okay? It is further divided into test of details and substantive analytical procedure. Substantive analytical procedure is what? Calculating ratios and comparisons. Test of details is what? When you are checking the transaction, each and every transaction in detail from starting to end, you are checking all the transactions. It is divided into two parts, what? Vouching and verification. Verification, I told you that the balances that are appearing in the balance sheet, you need to verify them. That is called verification. And whatever transactions have happened during the year, have occurred during the year, like your purchases, sales, your inflow and outflow of cash, whatever transactions have occurred during the year, you will do the vouching. That is, you are going to examine the documentary evidences. And you all now know that documents can be what? Internal, external, they can be original, they can be in photocopy. So we'll be applying all those audit procedures. Okay? So with this, we have finished our topic of audit procedures. And now to a very important topic, which is assertion. So before starting with assertion, I want a reply from all of you that whether you have understood the topic audit procedures, whereby we discuss risk assessment procedures, test of control, substantive procedures. Under substantive procedures, we discuss what? Test of details and substantive analytical procedures. And under test of details, we have discussed vouching and verification. Okay? So quickly tell me, I need your replies. And thereafter, we'll be starting with one of your favorite queries, which is what? Assertions. And next 3 sessions for this chapter are going to be really very important. We'll be covering 7 essays. There are total 9 essays in this chapter. 230, essay 230, that is audit documentation, we have already done. Essay 500 on audit evidence also we have already done. Rest 7 essays, essays I'll be starting in the next session on Wednesday. So meanwhile, please send in your replies. Abhi I have received a reply from few students only. So please send in whether you have understood all the procedures. Okay? And see, students, your understanding will be enhanced when you will give module today itself till where we have covered, or maximum by tomorrow, so that you are able to recall the examples that we are discussing and you are able to, correlate the topics. I generally prefer to, relate the topics from a chapter number 2, chapter number 1. So you also just, when you are referring to your module, just go back to chapter number 2 and just have a look. Ki, acha, wahan pe ye likha hua tha. This will help you in remembering the concepts. Okay? ठीक है. Now assertions. So what is meant by the term assertion? ठीक है, बार बार we are using this term and this term will be used again and again. So I told you that students, we need to give our expert opinion on the financial statement as a whole. ठीक है, कि whether the financial statement reflect a true and fair view, and the financial statement is prepared with the help of various financial information, or I can say various assertions. Now, unless and until I as an auditor, I check, I am sure about each and every assertion, I cannot give my opinion on the financial statement as a whole. ठीक है, so assertions are used by management, assertions are used by auditor, ठीक है, to do something. And who will give that assertion? Quickly tell me, who is preparing the financial statement? The management. So who will give those assertions? The management. And what as an auditor we will do with those assertions? We will check those assertions only. Then when we will become sure about these assertions, we will give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. ठीक है? Now, just tell me that if the management, the client XYZ Limited is our client, ठीक है? Now, if the client has a building worth ₹1 crore, how will the management or the client tell this to, declare this thing? Tell this to the users of financial statement, or will declare? Will the management just pick up the mic and start announcing that, see, we have a building of 1 crore? No. Management will simply prepare the financial statements. Management will what? Prepare the financial statement, and management will declare all such things in the financial statement. Financial statement will say, management will mention na that building itne ka hai, furnitures and fittings itne ka hai, during the year income itna hua, expense itna hua. Management will do that. ठीक है? So what are assertions? So assertions are representations by management. Management को ही तो पता है ना कि क्लाइंट की कंपनी के पास कितना पैसा है, कितना बिल्डिंग है, कितना डेटर्स है, कितना क्रेडिटर्स है, कितना लोन है. तो मैनेजमेंट विल ओनली टेल द यूजर्स ऑफ द फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट ना कि द कंपनी इज हैविंग सो एंड सो थिंग. सो द डिक्शनरी मीनिंग ऑफ द वर्ड or the synonym for assertion is what? Declaration. And if I go by the dictionary meaning, it says action of stating something strongly. So if the management knows that the company is having a building worth ₹1 crore, management wants to tell its user, to management will assert it, or will represent it, or will declare it, or will say it where in the financial statements. ठीक है? So first of all, see, I have divided this definition into 5 points, but more importantly into 2 parts. ठीक है? So the first part talks as to assertion and management, how they are related, and the second part is as to auditor and assertion, how they are related. ठीक है? इतना तो we have understood that management ही assertion देता है, and that also you have understood that auditor will be checking those assertion only. है ना? I told you that financial statement as a whole पे opinion देना है, but these are made up of what? Individual assertions. तो इन्हीं individual assertions को तो auditor is going to check, then only he'll be able to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. ठीक है? So 2 parts are there. तो अभी we are trying to understand the first part. So representations by management, है ना? Explicit or otherwise. Explicit is what? Expressly mentioned. Or otherwise is what? Opposite of explicit, which is implied. Implied. ठीक है? That are embodied. Embodied, the dictionary meaning is what? Included. See, these dictionary meanings and everything, na, synonyms and all, these are not to be written in the exam. I'm telling you all these meanings for your better understanding. ठीक है? ठीक है? So see, representations by management, explicit or otherwise. Either it can be expressly mentioned or it can be implied, that are embodied in the financial statements. Embodied is what? That are included in the financial statement. ठीक है? So we have discussed the relationship of what? Management and assertion. ठीक है? And now let us see how auditor is going to use this assertion. The concept that we need to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole, and for that we need to check each and every individual assertion, because the financial statements are prepared when all these assertions are put together. So the second part, as used by the auditor, some representations जो management ने दिए हैं, these are used by the auditor. Why? To consider different types of potential misstatement that may occur. Potential is what? Likely. Abhi auditor is not sure na ki whether there is a mistake or not. Auditor is going to check them. And potential, it might be probable, like probability is there, or it is likely that misstatement may occur. Hana, why word may? Because see, audit, if you remember, when we did the difference between audit and official investigation in our chapter number 1, we saw that official investigation is started with a preconceived notion that something wrong has been done. However, when we are doing audit, no such preconceived notion is there. So auditor is going to check, and then potential misstatement may occur. Abhi shall nahi hai. ठीक है? So second part, as used by the auditor. Now I told you that financial statements are prepared of different assertions. ठीक है? These A are what? Assertion. Purchases hai, sales hai, assets hai, liabilities hai. Now when I'm going to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole, I as an auditor, I'm going to check each and every assertion now. So I'm using these. Why? To consider different types of potential misstatement. इसी में तो misstatement ढूंढोगे ना, because इसी में तो देखना है ना कि whether these assertion reflected true and fair view. And when you are sure about each and every assertion, you can give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Now let us read this definition, putting both the clauses together. Assertion is representation by management, explicit or otherwise. Management may expressly mention something or implied that are included in the financial statement, as used by the auditor to consider different types of potential misstatement that may occur. Now students, explicit or otherwise. Explicit, I told you, expressly mentioned, or otherwise is what? Implied. Now tell me, when management has mentioned that building worth ₹1 crore is there, see, we are, or the users and the auditor, we are going to assume a number of things. What I as a user of the financial statement, or I as an auditor, I will assume that it is implied that this building actually exists. As such, management has not mentioned na ki building exists, this word, right? At this look, anything like that has not been mentioned now, but I will assume as a rational user of the financial statement, as an auditor, I'm going to assume that, see, I'm saying the users will also assume and the auditor will also assume that the building exists. And when the management is showing this building at 1 crore, I will also assume that the company is having the ownership, the right over this building. See, I will not assume na that this company is not owned by management. ये वाला assumption थोड़ी ना लेंगे जब balance sheet में there is a building of 1 crore, है ना? So this is what existence assertion. तो मैनेजमेंट ने स्पेसिफिकली तो नहीं लिखा है ना दैट द क्लाइंट इज हैविंग अ राइट ओवर दिस बिल्डिंग, बट दिस इज व्हाट implied assertion. Implied है that if a building has been shown worth rupees 1 crore, it is implied that that building actually exists. That building has been owned by the client organization. So implied, I hope the word implied is clear. ठीक है. Now when a plant and machinery has been shown, let's say at 2 lakhs, okay, let me take you through the example that has been given in your module, then it is going to be more clear. Assertion. See, representations by management, explicit or otherwise, that are embodied in the financial statement, ठीक है, as used by the auditor to consider the different types of potential misstatement that may occur. I have divided this definition in what? 2 parts, ठीक है. So पहला part, relationship of what? Assertion and management, and then assertion and auditor. So it says that assertions are what given represented by management. ठीक है. Management क्या करेगा? Management will get that printed in the newspaper? नहीं. Management will include that in the financial statement, and it may be included explicit or otherwise. Expressly mention कर देंगे या कुछ implied होगा. I gave you example of existence, ownership. ठीक है. And why will an auditor use it? Auditor will use it to consider the different types of potential misstatements that may occur. उन्हीं assertion से financial statement has been prepared. Financial statements पे ही auditor has to give an opinion. So इन्हीं assertions को तो auditor is going to check ना. Then only he'll be in a position to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. So in representing the financial statements, in representing that financial statement are in accordance with applicable FRF, management implicitly or explicitly makes assertion regarding what? Recognition, measurement, presentation, disclosure. What are all those? We will just discuss. Assertions are used by the auditor to consider different types of potential misstatement, and these may be of 3 types. See, if you remember, I just told you that there are certain transactions that have taken place during the year. ठीक है. So the assertion with respect to those. Then there are certain account balances that are appearing in the balance sheet. So the assertion with respect to those. And then there are certain disclosures. So the assertion with respect to those. ठीक है. Abhi be with me, you will be able to understand this in detail. See. Let's take an example of sales. So when the management has shown a figure of sales, let's say rupees 10 lakhs, ठीक है, this is coming in the P&L. So what is management representing or declaring or asserting when the management has shown this sales at 10 lakhs? It means that certain things are implied out of these. And what are those implied assertions? That occurrence, that is the sale of rupees 10 lakhs have actually occurred during the year. ऐसा नहीं है that they have not occurred फिर भी management have shown. If you are implying something, you are assuming something, सीधा सीधा ही तो सोचोगे ना that management ने जो show किया है that have actually occurred. ठीक है. Completeness, that this 10 lakhs consist of all the transactions, all the sales that have taken place during the year. So this is what completeness assertion. That management, by writing sales of rupees 10 lakhs, management wants to declare or management wants to assert that users of the financial statement, listen to me, these sales of 10 lakhs have actually occurred during the year, and these 10 lakhs show the complete all sales that have taken place during the year. These sales have been shown at correct amount. These have been accurately recorded. These pertain to the current period only. Cut off that transaction sales up to 31st March are only appearing. The sales pertaining to only 12 months are appearing. Cut off the period till 31st March. The sales transactions are only those which pertains to the current year. year and classification, whatever has been shown has been properly classified. Let me give you another example here. Let's say if any expense has been shown in the P&L, it means that it is revenue in nature. It is not to be capitalized. Proper classification has been done. Now, just imagine that, is there, whatever I have told you right now, are all these things written in writing in the financial statement? That cut off, that only the sales pertaining to the current year are included? No. These are what? Implied. Does the management mention that all sales is equal to 10 lakhs? No, sales is equal to 10 lakhs. So whether all transactions have been included, this is what implied. Whether correctly show kiya nahi, this is what implied. Whether pertaining to the current year he show kiya, it is what implied. And whether duly properly classified, other income ko to sales mein nahi dikhaya na, so this is what implied. Aap ye to nahi assume karoge na that other income has been shown as sales. Nahi. What will you assume? That proper classification has been done. So these are the implied assertion out of what? Transactions or events that have occurred during the year, for the year under audit. Okay? Now, see, with respect to any asset, you will not say that this building occurred as on. See, the balance sheet items are what? As on 31st March. So you will not say they have occurred. You will say they exist. So you will find that more or less the assertions are same, but the nomenclature will be different. So let us see. With respect to account balances, and we all know that the account balances are at the period end. Balance sheet is prepared as on a particular date. Now, so exist. You will not say that the asset liability, they occurred. You will say they exist. The equity, the debtors, everything, they exist. You will say that the entity has a right over the building that is coming. See, this is again what? Implied assertion. As such, management is not writing now that the company is having a right over this building. No. When the building of 1 crore has been shown, it is implied. When I'm looking at the financial statement, I'm going to assume that the company has a right over this building. I will perform the audit procedures to be sure about this assertion. Okay? So whatever assertions we are discussing now, unhi ko to auditor is going to check in order to give his opinion on the financial statement as a whole. So rights and obligations kya hai? That the building, the company is having a right over that building, and obligation is for what? For liabilities. And by performing the audit procedures, I will be checking these assertions only. Completeness. Completeness to common bol sakte hai na, that all assets, liabilities have been recorded. Okay? Valuation and allocation. That whatever has been shown are at appropriate amounts, resulting valuation or allocation adjustments are appropriately recorded. Depreciation, amortization, everything. Whatever is required has been duly accounted for. Is it mentioned somewhere? No. It is what? Implied assertion. And we as an auditor, we are going to check each and every assertion that has been given by the management. That is whether explicit or otherwise. Let's say example, building. ठीक है, building आ रहा है कितना? 1 crore. तो existence assertion check करना है whether this building exists or not. I may go for what? Inspection. Inspection is what? Physical examination of asset. ठीक है, मेरे को ओनरशिप चेक करना है. आई मे इंस्पेक्ट द टाइटल डीड, है ना. आई नीड टू चेक द वैल्यूएशन. आई मे सी डेप्रिसिएशन कैलकुलेशन. आई मे रिकैलकुलेट. ठीक है. सो these assertions which has been given by management, we are going to check these assertion only, and based on our checking, we are going to give an opinion. And how we'll be checking that? We will be checking that by performing what? Audit procedures. Okay? Assertions about presentation and disclosure. If any event has been disclosed, so that has actually occurred. Okay? Completeness. All disclosures have been shown. Classification and understandability. If anything has, if suppose contingent liability is there, or if it is not there, everything has been properly shown so as to be understandable to the users of the financial statement, and accuracy and valuation. Clear? So these are the assertions. Let me just take you through this. So what are these assertions? These are the various meanings that we derive from the financial statement. That is what management is want to tell to the users or to the auditor that see, building है तो इसका मतलब it exists, ownership है, valuation correct है, and we as auditors, we are going to use this assertion in order to detect any potential misstatement कि गलत assertions तो नहीं है. Why? Because we need to give an opinion. So classes of transactions and events, the transactions that have taken place during the year, purchase, sales, inflow, outflow of cash, whatever transaction is there, we are going to check the occurrence, the completeness, the accuracy, cutoff and classification. Account balances, that is the balances that are appearing when the management is representing that building of rupees 1 crore is there. So there are various implied assertion, that is a user will assume whenever he looks at building 1 crore, these assumptions are going to come to his mind. What? That this building exists. And this is what we are also going to check. That the company is having the right over that building. This is what we are going to check. That all the buildings have been shown. This is what we are going to check, and valuation has been done properly, and this is what we are going to check. So we as an auditor, we are checking each and every assertion वो specifically mentioned है या implied है, ठीक है? And then we'll be giving our opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Let us see this example. This beautifully explains the concept of assertion. When we find in the financial statement an item under the head of cash of 8,000. So what are the obvious implied assertion? Obvious है, expressly लिखा नहीं है, but these are what obvious implied है, that the firm concerned had 8,000 cash in valid notes and coins. ठीक है कि ये valid notes coins है, ऐसा नहीं है कि company cannot spend those cash. That the cash was free and available for expenditure to the firm, and that the books of account show a cash balance of identical amount. ठीक है? That if 8,000 is coming, it means कि company has the right to spend those 8,000. Valid notes में है वो. ठीक है? If you are going to assume what? Whatever has been asserted by management. अब management ये लिखेगा थोड़ी ना कि we are free to spend this cash. No, this is implied. Same way, when a building of 2 lakh has been shown, depreciation of 70,000 is there, accumulated depreciation of 13,000 is there for the year. So what assertions, what all are you are going to assume? That the firm owns the plant and machinery. Just look at this example. Is it mentioned specifically that owned by the company? Is it mentioned in words? No. But this is implied. Historical cost is 2 lakh. Plant and machinery physically exists. Is it mentioned somewhere that it exists? No. This is what implied. Okay? Same way, you can just have a read at these assertions. Now, what are negative assertions? See, when furniture and fitting, nothing is mentioned. Like furniture and fitting is not mentioned. What does that mean? That company is not having furnitures and fittings. So what is this negative assertion? Hana? And implied negative assertion. See, what is negative assertion? Let me just repeat this example. That furniture and fitting is the example of what? Implied negative assertion. There is no furniture fitting coming in the balance sheet. What does that imply? There is no furniture fitting. ठीक है? आप ये assume थोड़ी ना करोगे कि furniture fitting is not coming, फिर भी है नहीं. What will you assume कि furniture fitting if it is not coming, इसका मतलब it is not existing, है ना? तो implied negative assertion, ठीक है? When management is specifically mentioning that there are no contingent liability, what is it? It is an assertion, but since no word has been used, it is what? Negative assertion. C. Negative assertions are also encountered in the financial statement, and the same may be expressed or implied. For example, if it is stated that there is no contingent liability, it would be an expressed negative assertion. On the other hand, if in the balance sheet there is no item of building, it will be an implied negative assertion that the entity did not own any building on the balance sheet date. ठीक है? So assertions can be what? Explicit or implicit. They can be what? Negative and they can be what? Positive. Positive is what? अगर building लिखा है 1 crore. अगर building लिखा ही नहीं है, what does that imply? कि building नहीं है ना? So this is what? Implied negative assertion. You can just have a read at this and see. This paragraph will summarize you as to what is assertion. This is a very beautifully explained paragraph. Let's have a look at this paragraph. See. Every financial statement contains an overall representation in addition to specific assertions. Each financial statement purports to present something as a whole in addition to its component detail. The balance sheet में different assets तो आ रहे हैं, but as a whole it wants to give a position of something. For example, an income statement purports to present the results of operation. A balance sheet purports to present what? Financial position. The auditor's opinion is typically directed to these overall presentations, but to formulate and offer an opinion on the overall truth of these statements, he has first to inquire the truth of many specific assertions, expressed or implied, positive or negative, that makes up each of these statements. Financial statements, P&L, balance sheet, इन्हीं assertions से तो बनता है ना. Out of his individual judgments of these specific assertions, he arrive at the judgment on the financial statement as a whole. Now, if auditor has seen, अच्छा ठीक है, building exist भी करती है, ownership भी है, right भी है, exist भी करता है, value भी fine है, okay, building is correctly shown. Same way for purchases, sales. जब सबके ऊपर auditor will have a conclusion, he will be able to give an opinion on the financial statements as a whole. And unless and until auditor checks each and every specific assertion that is coming in the financial statement, who will give it? Management. Now that is why they are called what? Management representation. Okay? These are what mentioned were embodied in the financial statement. And when auditor will check these assertions, then only auditor will be able to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. Okay? So I hope this topic of assertion is clear, and we will be doing this in much more detail in chapter number 9. Okay? So please just read all these 8 points. Whatever we have discussed is mentioned there. Okay? And types of audit evidence we have already done in our last session when we did audit evidence. Okay? Relevance, reliability we have seen. Okay? Then this also we have seen how the reliability of audit evidence increases. Okay? So with this we have covered the basic understanding of this chapter. What is left in this chapter is what? Your essays, which I'll be starting in the next session. But before that, I want you all to just have a read till page number, what is this? 3.38, so that all the concepts relating to audit documentation, audit file, then your audit evidence, the audit procedures, the various risk assessment procedures, internal controls, the test of controls, everything, assertions, including assertions, everything should be clear to you. Okay? Uske baad we'll be starting with essays, and 7 essays will be covering, which is very important. See, essays, you can get a straightforward MCQ or case scenario, hana, or descriptive question can come. So please, before coming for that class, for the next session, do read the entire module till where we have seen, and entire, I mean, including illustrations and example. Let me just have a look at your queries and then I'll end the session. Meanwhile, please send in whether you have understood or not, and please also fill the feedback forms that are given to you at the end of the session. So please tell me whether you have understood. So Pooja is saying, ma'am, deeply understood. Good, clear. So yes, Abhijit is saying, ma'am, assertion includes account balances, notes, transaction entries, vouchers. Yes, assertion includes each and everything that is being given in the financial statements. The word is what? Embodied in the financial statement. So whatever is coming in the financial statement, first of all, who is giving that? Management. Usi ko to auditor will check, and based on the conclusion about each and every assertion, auditor will be in a position to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. So Charu is saying today's session was interesting. Good. Let me just have a look at all your queries. Please, students, send me. Others also send me whether you have understood or not. So Brinda is saying, ma'am, please give example of management override of control. See, it's basically means that management may itself not consider the controls. Let's say, for example, there is a control that with respect to traveling expense exceeding rupees 5,000, it need to be signed by what? 2 authorized signatory. But what happens is whenever any of the traveling bills of any senior official comes, then they say, okay, even if it is signed by 1 authorized signatory, you may please pass it. So management is what? Disregarding the controller. It is ignoring the controller. It is bypassing the control. So overriding the control. So Vrinda, please tell me whether it now it is clear or not. External confirmation, Sandeep, I'll be taking in the next session. So I'll please. Hana. So please send your queries again. I'll take that in the next session. And before coming for the session, please read the entire chapter. You need to read each and every word at least once. Your understanding is going to be, crystal clear after you just give a reading with concentration to the entire module, including your illustrations, your diagrams, your examples. Okay? So again, students, thank you for giving me the extra 10 minutes. And please start learning. Start reading the module and start learning. Okay? Then only you will be able to fetch good marks in your exam. Okay? So thank you for your feedback, and see you on session on Wednesday. Okay? So good night. Thank you.